For the primary time, Connecticut has permitted individuals to cast polls early, in individual ahead of indecision, a long time after almost every other state within the nation offered voters that alternative. Saturday marks the ultimate day of early voting before Tuesday's presidential essential, and turnout so distant has been light. After the primary 3 days of voting, there was no early voting on Friday since of the Great Friday occasion. 13,476 voters out of more than 1.2 million enlisted Democrats and Republicans had cast their ballots in individual. President Joe Biden and previous President Donald Trump, as of now, have secured the specified delegates to be considered their party's hypothetical candidates, so the stakes are not tall. In spite of the generally little turnout as a result, state officials said they were satisfied, noticing there had been no major issues with the unused framework. We inquired voters to assist us test the framework and make their voices listened, and voters of Connecticut replied the call, Secretary of the State Stephanie Thomas said in the explanation. Presently, as it were 4 states, Alabama, Delaware, Mississippi, and unused Hampshire, don't permit early, in-person voting, in spite of the fact that they may offer choices for qualified non-attended voters. Delaware already permitted early voting, but a state court struck it down as unlawful in a February 23 ruling. Maria Urson at long last got the chance to vote early in Connecticut, and at a time that suited her active plan. It was a welcome alter from her traditional early morning surge to the surveys, sometime recently work each race day. I like it, she said after casting her early presidential essential poll for Biden within the storm cellar of Stonington Town Lobby. I can fair kind of fit it in and not stress around it. Advocates had attempted for a long time to revise the state's abnormally inflexible structure, which entirely directed the time put in way of decisions, basically requiring voters to cast votes at their neighborhood surveying put on race day in a common or essential, unless they met the state's strict capabilities to vote by non-attendant vote. There was resistance to alter within the state known as the land of relentless propensities, particularly from Republicans who voiced concerns around evacuating what they consider voting shields, and whether nearby voting authorities had sufficient subsidizing and staffing to provide early voting. Connecticut came near in 2014 to at long last correcting its structure to give the common gathering the specialist to eliminate restrictions on early voting and permit extended qualification for non-attended ballots. But that poll address, which advocates recognized was ineffectively worded and likely confounded voters, was rejected. Finally, voters endorsed a protected correction in 2022 with more than 60% of the vote, and the Common Assembly passed legislation outlining the subtle elements final year. Whereas there were 4 days of early voting for this essential, there will be 14 for the common decision. Beneath Connecticut's modern framework, when a voter goes to the surveys, his or her title is looked up within the state's centralized voter enlistment framework, which quickly marks the individual as having voted early to avoid voting more than once. Peggy Roberts, the Republican Registrar of Voters in Stonington, said the early voting dispatch was slow but unfaltering, with 61 people casting early votes the primary day. The voters, she said, have tended to be more seasoned. They just like the reality that they're not having to stand in line, said Roberts, including that looking up people on the computerized voter database has been the foremost time-consuming part and may have to be balanced sometime recently the common election. But that handle has been educational for a few voters, she said. In each town, there's a couple of individuals who think that it's simple to deceive, and they're seeing that it's not simple to cheat, she said. It's exceptionally organized and secure. Not everybody was persuaded. Jolynn Brockshoe, a Republican, said she and her spouse, Dan Brockhoe, chosen to vote early after passing the Stonington Town corridor amid a walk. Indeed, in spite of the fact that they cast votes, they were not persuaded early voting is required in Connecticut and accept there ought to be fair one day to yield votes. Too much opportunity for cheating, Jolin Brochu said of the early voting choice. However, Brochu said it makes sense as a Republican to utilize the opportunity to vote early in case there are long lines at the surveys on decision day or issue with a voting machine. I know Democrats take that opportunity at a much higher rate than Republicans do, she said. So I think it's imperative for Republicans to begin doing the same thing.